Okay. So I'm Jenae Edwards, and I am at Anchor Church. I lead worship there, and I also write music and create songs. So I guess I kind of want to start out with the fact that I have known my whole life that we exist to glorify God and to make Him known. And I don't know that there's a time in my life where I didn't have that understanding to some capacity. But the implications of how that's played out in my life, I don't know that I really fully recognize that, or even still, if I fully recognize that, I don't know that I felt the freedom of what it means to do things for the glory of God as the core purpose, how much freedom that can bring, until really probably about 3 or 4 years ago. I'm 37. Probably tragic that it took me that long to get over myself, but I really think that those a couple of years ago was a huge breakthrough for me in my ability to create. And so just to give you kind of a background, that this is, I think I was practicing my giftings, but I very much was hindered in how I shared those giftings with others. About a few years ago, I came to a point in my life. I came to a kind of a crisis. I was working on an album, and I had been working on this same album for 8 years. Out of probably mostly because I was so nervous to share or to take the risk, even to share it with people that could help me put it to or bring it to fruition. And I had some friends, Judd and Lisa Cameron, who were willing to kind of come alongside of me, and I think we helped each other a lot in developing or maybe overcoming our fears of what it meant to create. And so in that kind of process, there came about this ability to be able to create my music to the best way I knew how. So when I released that CD, I can't explain it. I was so scared. I was fine until I released it. And then when I released it, I had probably 4 panic attacks. Like, oh my gosh, I feel exposed. I feel vulnerable. What if people don't like this music? I had all of these fears that I didn't even know were there. And I was so nervous that I wasn't good enough to create. I knew that I enjoyed what I did. I knew that I had some gifting, but I was so nervous that someone was going to reject that gifting. And I think that that's really kind of the same feeling of exposure that happened in the garden when Adam and Eve, they were naked and they were not ashamed when they were living in community with God and glorifying Him and working for His glory. And then all of a sudden they came to this point of fear of rejection of one another and of God. And I really just saw that plain as day when there was no more excuses. I did as that project as well as I could, and if it sunk or if it stunk, that meant that I stunk. And so that kind of started a trajectory of a journey of God really challenging me in my gifts to grow, just circumstances in my life and at our church, just to grow in my gifting, and really put me in a place of real vulnerability, and a kind of a quest of not just recognizing that my gifts are to glorify God and to edify others, but actually God showing me what that means, like bringing that down to my heart. I'm not responsible for how people receive the gifts that God has given me. I am responsible for how I hone those things and how I work on those things, how I inspire others to use those similar giftings, how I enable others, and challenging myself to make it as good as it can be, and I'm responsible for sharing it. Like the talents, the parable of the talents. I know that there's other things that are going on there, but it is Are you willing to share your talent? And my husband, Harvey, he recommended a book called Adorning the Darkness by Andrew Peterson. He was like, you need to read this book. And so I read it on a plane. I was going on a trip, and I was just weeping in the plane. Just that we're called, our giftings are gifted to us, we don't have to like do something great with our gifts, but we're called to use them. And we don't have to, we're just called to be diligent in that. And so like we don't have to fear other people's response to that. That's really what a lot of the gift or this book is about. It's called Adorning the Darkness. Our gifts are given to us to adorn the darkness of our world, to make people see the beauty of God's kingdom, to glorify God, and to call people to repentance, call people to the reality of who God is. So when we started Anchor 4 years ago, kind of our desire was to create a local body that was centered on God's word and that was equipping the body to use their gifts and to work together and to be ministers of the gospel in their sphere of influence. And I don't know that we saw that as clearly. About 2 years ago, we kind of defined that further, the elders in the church. And part of those things that kind of really came to fruition was our desire to equip in all different areas of the church, that we're equipping the people that are gifted in those ways to use their gifts. And specifically with music, I've always had like a desire for a music community. I kind of had to, like when we started, I kind of had to release that because I didn't know if that would be a possibility or not, of creating music. And exactly what was I think when I kind of started leading that area in our church, my biggest fear was that it wasn't going to be like produced like these churches that have all resources at their disposal. We're a church plant, and we're not going to invest in the lights and the production. And so how do we create a genuine way for people to use their giftings? And I think that's still in process, but I think it's so important. And about a year ago, the Lord maybe a year and a half, the Lord started bringing just a lot of inspiration through the sermons that the elders and Rand were preaching. And I just got a flood of songs that were congregational, that were not like my normal writing. And it started kind of cultivating ways for people to plug in. But I think that's a work of the Spirit. And I think it's also exciting. I think our body is edified when they see, it doesn't sound like Bethel, but it sounds like Anchor. And it's in response to what we are learning, and it's in response to the community that we're in, and it's inspired by the people that we're doing life with. And a lot of those kinds of things take away a lot of my fear of me not being good enough, or the words that I say not being good enough. All of a sudden, because I'm not doing it for my own like elevation, it doesn't really matter whether it's good enough. It's what I'm doing for God's glory, and He's pleased. Just like I'm so pleased when my son brings me a flower from the yard or draws a picture that anyone else would look at and be like, that looks like a piece of crap. To me, it's beautiful, and that's my motivation. I think I've mentioned a couple times I've been talking to you guys, this fear of being good enough. And And I think that's etched in all of us. I think we're afraid that we aren't measuring up to something. And I think that has a lot to do with our understanding of what it means to be made in the image of God, and what our identity truly is in. It's not, our identity isn't in anything that we do. Our identity isn't in anything that we accomplish or that we don't do. It's in the fact that we are innately born as an image bearer of God. And furthermore, as we've responded to Christ and have recognized that we're broken and we need Jesus, and that He's the one that actually enables us to be an image bearer of God to the full extent, when we, as believers who have the Spirit of God, we're able to live in freedom in the way He's created us. So this song is called The Work of Our Hands, and I wrote it as I was pulling out weeds in this natural area, which is a terrible idea. They're going to grow right back, but I thought I would try it. I'm pulling all these weeds, and I started thinking how ridiculous my job was, and I started just singing this song, and it's talking about how I was just feeling the dirt on my hands, and I was like in the sunshine, and all of a sudden this toil, these weeds, were giving like just incredible life to me. I was watching my boys help on the yard, and it was just kind of a picture of how, like, even in our toil, we can be inspired by who God is and what He's done, and this incredible creation that He's given us. To be bearers of His image, His creators within. The creation He gives us, we will toil in the depths of the wake of our sin. But He works through the wreckage if we trust in Him who's redeeming His bride with His life, death, and resurrection. With creation, we will worship Creator God, holding all of His art in His hands. We will worship Creator God while working His land. With creation, we will worship Creator God, holding all of His art in His hands. We will worship Creator God while working His land. And I think, like, also I have in growing and understanding what it looks like to be an image bearer of a Creator God, and to what it means for me as His image bearer to be a creator. It takes away, like, or it gives me the answer for why I do the things I do. I had so many people like, well, what are you gonna do with this album? Or what are you gonna do with this song? And I was just always just like, I don't know. I don't want to be like this crazy movie star. I'm really too old for any of those things. I don't know why. And to be able to say, I have to do it, and it's how God's gifted me, and He always gives me a way to share that. So it has nothing to do with whether I'm good enough. I'm good enough in that I'm not good enough, but Christ is sufficient. And that element of what it means for Christ to be sufficient and Christ to give me freedom, I think I've missed that a lot in my life. That I'm free because I don't have to worry so much about that. I'm an image bearer of God, and the uniqueness of my gifting is what makes it valuable. regardless of what other people or how other people receive it.
And we're singing the song with the wildflowers and words on their way. Singing songs of a hope with the grace that He gives for today.